Good afternoon or good evening, depending where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, March the 11th, 2022. And it is too bright. So, there, that's better. It's Mask Freedom Day in British Columbia. Hooray! Don't say I never bring you any good news. This is from Cindy Harnett at the Victoria Times Colonist. Masks will no longer be required for most indoor public spaces as of Friday, that's today. And the BC vaccine card won't be needed to enter non-essential businesses and venues effective April 8th. Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry said Thursday, citing a significant reduction in COVID-19 hospitalizations and high rates of vaccination. I want to assure you that I feel confident about what we are doing and that we are in a place to do this now. These decisions are grounded in science and in the data that we have about what's happening in our communities. Also effective Friday, overnight child and youth camps can resume and capacity limits on faith gatherings are gone. Masks will no longer be required for K-12 schools and childcare after students return from spring break, which varies among districts and public and independent schools. Those who want to continue to wear masks and are comfortable doing that will be supported to do that, both staff and students, said Henry. But it will no longer be a mandate in classrooms in particular and in other parts of the school. Measures to prevent crowding, such as staggered times for lunch and school pickups, will no longer be required. BC courthouses will continue to require masks in all areas Friday and until further notice. Yeah, the same things happened in Alberta. And the courts explained that they have to keep the mask mandate because many of the people who appear in court are marginalized people. Marginalized, I suppose, because they are criminals. But there we have it. By March the 18th, visits to all long-term care homes will be restored. Henry asked for visitors' patience as seniors' homes adjust to the changes over the next week. Requirements for visitors to be fully vaccinated and undergo rapid tests will remain. As of April the 8th, businesses will transition from COVID-19 safety plans to communicable disease plans. And no more, yes, here we go. As of Friday, masks will no longer be required on board ferries, although they continue to be recommended, BC Ferry said in a statement, adding, BC Ferries ask customers to respect fellow passengers and crew. Everyone's comfort level may be different during the easing of COVID restrictions. BC Transit said masks will no longer be mandatory on buses, though it will take time to remove signs about mandatory masking. Really? Henry said she plans to continue wearing a mask on public transit and encourages others to do so. Oh, so Dr. Henry is on the bus? Is she? I don't think so. We know it protects us, but it is also a sign of respect and protection for others. And Ian Tostenson, President and CEO of the BC Restaurant and Food Association, said, if Dr. Henry says it's time, it's time. We follow the leader here. And she's done an extraordinary job of leading us. Restaurants will leave it up to staff and customers to decide whether to wear a mask, he said. The elimination of the BC vaccine card on April the 8th will no doubt increase business for restaurants. Yes, I can imagine. Well, businesses celebrated the changes. Oh, businesses. How about ordinary people? BC Green Party leader Sonia Furstenau said the province should have kept basic protections in place for essential workers, such as transit operators, people in high transmission and low ventilation areas, and the most vulnerable, including seniors, unvaccinated kids, and the immunocompromised. Cope. Now, I don't believe that I can go onto a ferry even after April the 8th because the federal government has decided that neither can I get on a plane. Not that I particularly want to. So today, I knew that the mask mandate ended as of midnight, but I walked out of my room and I'm grasping for my mask, and oh no, I don't need to wear it anymore. And then when I come back into the hotel, I'm grasping for my mask. Oh no, I don't need it anymore. I guess that's going to take a while. I still see a great number of people wearing masks outside, even when they're alone, including the BC Ministry of Finance is right next to me, the building right next to me, and I saw people going into the building wearing masks because, of course, these people are supposed to be the best and the brightest, but no, they're just civil uh, servants. Here we have a piece by Neil McCrae at the Conservative Woman or conservativewoman.co.uk, a time to reflect for the COVID collaborators. Thank you for keeping us safe. This was a typical sycophantic reply to the COVID restrictions imposed by the likes of Mark Drakeford in Wales and Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. In England, Guardian readers accused Boris Johnson of recklessness, the worst leader at the worst possible time. I'm no apologist for Johnson, but I shudder to think of the regime under Sir Keir Starmer. As mandates are being withdrawn across the world, some people are bereft. With the tide receding on public health puritanism, they insist on continuing to wear a mask. It's to show compassion for others, they say. Face covering, unprecedented in our culture, became a symbol of COVID culture. Never scientifically justified, the Spanish flu epidemic over 100 years ago showed that masks increased infection. It was really an obedience test. Significantly, it readily identified the awkward minority. No mask, no entry signs proliferated, some remaining long after the rule was officially relaxed. Then came the vaccine, but Pfizer baptism was not visibly obvious. Instead, the righteously jabbed enthusiastically supported punishment and rewards in the form of a domestic vaccine passport. I watched a rally against the COVID pass in Belgium. As the marchers passed a trendy bar restaurant, customers came out to watch the procession of anti-vaxxers, their aloofness drawing remarks on how they would have collaborated with the Nazis. In France, Italy, Israel, Lithuania, Canada, and blue states in the USA, it was impossible to go anywhere without vaccine verification. In England, the government stopped short of the passports used in Wales and Scotland, but some sport and entertainment venues required them regardless. Left-wing singer Billy Bragg was heckled in Brighton. How could he endorse such blatant discrimination after opposing it throughout his career? As a third wave began in 2021, despite mass vaccination, abhorrent commentaries appeared on a regular basis in newspapers, such as Andrew Neil's Daily Mail tirade, "It's time to punish Britain's 5 million vaccine refuseniks." Refuseniks, that's an interesting word for Andrew Neil to have used, because refuseniks, where that term comes from, is the Soviet Union. And the refuseniks were those brave men and women who spoke out against communist tyranny. McCrae continues, at a news conference, Ardern smiled as she answered in the affirmative a journalist asking whether New Zealand was creating a two-tier society. Yet after months of politicians stating that vaccine passports were the new normal, suddenly they are being mothballed. Whether this is a response to worldwide protests, most notably the truckers in Ottawa, a COVID lethargy, or a planned intermission is difficult to discern. When the highest court ruled that vaccine mandates in the police and armed forces were a violation of human rights, Ardern shrugged and said that she intended to reverse the rule anyway. The cultists are upset that the unjabbed minority will not suffer for their alleged selfishness and ignorance. When Ontario declared an end to legal enforcement of vaccine passports, some businesses were keen to continue following the science. Toronto Zoo, for example, guaranteed that its visitors would be protected on its premises. Relieved recipients of the mRNA injections replied to the zoo on Twitter saying, "Thank you for keeping the animals safe." More revealing was the comment, 90% of Ontarians are vaccinated, so this is good. COVID certainly brought out the discriminatory mentality, giving platoons of little Hitlers power that they do not want to relinquish. This has worked wonders for the authorities, as tyranny is most effective when policed by the people themselves. A structure has been created, consolidated, and cemented, ready for the next contagion or other contrived crisis. A digital identity system has passed its pilot phase. Of course, disease control was not the primary reason for mass surveillance. The EU began developing a vaccine passport years earlier. Tony Blair tried unsuccessfully to introduce identity cards during his premiership. In the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government, in which Douglas Hurd was Home Secretary, planned to launch such a scheme for football fans. It was abandoned after the Hillsborough disaster, when dozens died due to another safety device, the perimeter fencing. As we have seen with COVID, snobs do not need much encouragement to apply their snobbery. However, stereotyping and demonizing people with different opinions or behaviors has worsened in recent decades, alongside the replacement of fact and reasoning with the narrative of progressive ideology. A critic of the COVID regime is not only wrong, but immoral. Using punitive segregation is a socially acceptable response to the morally unclean who contaminate society. This is mass projection. It not only dehumanizes the targeted minority, but also dehumanizes the majority who allow persecution to happen. Let us hope that the callous collaborators of the COVID tyranny will come to reflect on how they have treated their fellow citizens over the past 2 years. Well, it would be nice if they came to reflect. I'm actually looking forward to show trials and $1 trillion lawsuits. That's what I'm looking forward to. One can always dream, right? Let's go to the chat. Hello to Gamian, Anrun, Palcasso 88, Dan Allison, Denny McDougall, Jogakin 666. Jogakin 666 says mask plus eye patch, too many facial accoutrements. Yes, indeed. Hello to Emmett Kelly's Earth and Oscar Toe. So, yes, there's a lot of cope out there. What am I going to do without my precious mask? But I'll still show compassion. This is from Angelo Isidoru at the Post Millennial. The CBC has pulled a second false story about the Freedom Convoy, according to Blacklock's reporter. The story in question claimed foreigners played a role in the protest. Specifically, the claim was made on a radio broadcast of The World This Hour, self-described as Canada's most trusted audio newscast. According to the Western Standard, the network released a statement on the matter. Quote, on February 10th, in a report about the protest convoy, CBC's radio, The World This Hour, incorrectly said GoFundMe ended a fundraiser for the protesters over questionable donations to the group, unquote. No explanation was given in CBC's statement. The network claimed to have completed an analysis of Freedom Convoy donations and concluded there were suspicious donations from foreigners. CBC then ran multiple headlines of this false story. Convoy protest received hundreds of donations that appeared to be from abroad. A February headline read, in recent days, questions have emerged about how the protesters raised so much money so quickly and where it came from. Before GoFundMe shut down the protest convoy's crowdfunding page and announced donors would be refunded, it attracted more than 120,000 donations, and now amounting to more than $10 million. An analysis of GoFundMe donations by CBC News has revealed at least 1/3 of them had been made by donors who chose to remain anonymous or who listed names that were obviously fictitious or political commentary, unquote. Both false stories were by Elizabeth Thompson, a CBC reporter who has a history of speaking against the truckers. This was the case at a parliamentary press gallery event February 15th. Personally, I felt a little uncomfortable because there were all these guys roaming around the street, said Thompson. GoFundMe executives testified at the Commons Public Safety Committee March 3rd and confirmed only a small minority of donations were from outside Canada. Our records show 88% of donated funds originated in Canada, said Juan Benitez, president of GoFundMe. Furthermore, Canada's top anti-terror financing regulator said the convoy donations were entirely innocuous. This is the second time CBC has been forced to pull a false story. On February 3rd, the network corrected an earlier television story suggesting Russians, boo, were behind the Freedom Convoy. The claim of Russian involvement came from Power and Politics host Nick Coxell, who claimed there is concern that Russian actors could be continuing to fuel things as this protest grows, or perhaps even instigating it from the outside. The claim was entirely false, and the network was forced to correct itself. But a marker has been laid down that opposition to the government constitutes extremism, constitutes terrorism. This is from Alex Boutillier at the CNS News Network, or Global News, as it is commonly known. Canadians have lived in a splendid, naive sort of superiority that domestic extremism is not an issue in the country, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's national security advisor says. Not only is that simply not true, Jody Thomas told an Ottawa security conference Thursday, the issue is also here, and it is here to stay. We have a lot to unpack in this country. Yes, this is how senior security officials talk now. We have a lot to unpack in this country in terms of understanding what's going on and its impact on democracy, our institutions, and our society, Thomas said during a panel of the Ottawa Conference on Security and Defense. This is a problem that is not going away, he or she said. Thomas, who moved from the Department of National Defense to the National Security and Intelligence Advisor role in January, was responding to questions about the government's use of emergency powers to address the convoy protest that paralyzed Ottawa and blockaded border crossings in February. Oh, it paralyzed Ottawa. Did it? The city just ground to a halt. No, it didn't. Even if international border crossings and the billions in cross-border trade that depends on them were not blocked, Thomas said she believed the Ottawa protest was significant enough to warrant the use of the Emergencies Act. While styled as a protest against mandatory vaccinations for cross-border truckers, protest organizers' overriding goal, stated publicly, was to force democratically elected governments to remove all COVID-19 public health measures or be replaced. Oh, democratically elected governments. And did these democratically elected governments, did they vote for these mandates, for the lockdowns? No, they didn't. Unelected health bureaucrats, latrine wallas, were responsible for this. Thomas suggested that online echo chambers, where people can find whatever information source that suits their existing or desired worldview, partially fueled the events in Ottawa last month. A strong mistrust, if not outright anger, toward mainstream media was evident among the protesters that occupied downtown for weeks, along with widespread anti-government sentiment. Conspiracy theorists, including one about the World Economic Forum think tank infiltrating governments around the world, were referenced by some protest organizers. It's not a conspiracy theory. It is an admitted fact by no less than Klaus Schwab, the founder and head of the World Economic Forum, who used the very word infiltrating. If you live in this echo chamber, you believe this is true, you believe that the government is restricting your freedom, they have been and still are restricting our freedoms. I can't go to a restaurant in Victoria until April the 8th. It was supposed to be July the 1st, but I don't know, perhaps polls were shown to the NDP government. Oh, yes, they were saying that our freedoms were being restricted in a way that probably is not quite valid or accurate. How? How is it not quite valid or accurate? These people lie openly, and the regime media, the temple prostitutes, repeat their lies shamelessly. Global News' Rachel Gilmore, our old friend Rachel Gilmore, reported this week that some users on the online platforms used to organize the convoy protests and push their message, predominantly encrypted messaging app Telegram, have moved on to push Russian propaganda. Boo! About the ongoing invasion of Ukraine. But while Canadians' attention has shifted away from the protest to that conflict, it's funny how that happened, huh? And the Trudeau government's unprecedented use of emergency powers is still to face considerable scrutiny in Parliament. Jody Thomas, also suggested that there was a double standard at play in some Canadians' reaction to the convoy protest. I think that we apply middle class values to things. And if there had been a religiously motivated extremist in that group, our reaction would have been quite different. Oh, because there were no suicide bombers among the truckers? Just the utter contempt, the hatred that these people in government, in government departments, and in the media have for ordinary Canadians, it just drips off the page or the screen. And here's the CBC News, and which is determined to shut down all media organizations, however small, that do not agree with the narrative. This is by Catherine Tunney, Commissar Catherine Tunney. Federal Department gave money to magazine publishing pandemic misinformation. BC-based Common Ground received money from Canadian Heritage, which is tasked with fighting misinformation. Really? The Canadian Heritage Department is tasked with fighting misinformation, is it? As the federal government was promising to tackle harmful false claims about the pandemic spreading online, it was giving thousands of dollars to a magazine spreading vaccine misinformation, including unsubstantiated claims that COVID-19 vaccines could cause cancer in children. Well, the government gives well over $1 billion each year to the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which, as we have seen, pulled 2 stories because they were outright lies. That would count as misinformation or disinformation, wouldn't it? The Department of Canadian Heritage, which helps to oversee the government's response to a rising tide of false information online, there it is again. I thought the Department of Canadian Heritage was celebrating Canada's heritage, but no, apparently it's a censorship vehicle now. It confirmed that it had provided more than $17,000 to Common Ground magazine through a special program of the Canada Periodical Fund intended to help publications weather the pandemic. The BC publication calls itself Western Canada's biggest and best-loved monthly magazine dedicated to health, wellness, ecology, and personal growth. It has published multiple stories about what it calls forced, coercive medical interventions of Canadians. Yes, telling people that you won't be able to go to restaurants or travel and all manner of things or keep your job unless you get jabbed. That forced coercive medical intervention. How is any of that coercive? Oh dear. I think the reason this merits attention is the potential damage to the public good here, said Chris Dornan, a retired Carleton University journalism professor. Yes, potential damage to the public good does not apparently include destroying the economy, destroying society, and panicking everyone. Just because you find the view objectionable is not enough to say, well, this publication should not receive the support of public funds, because all sorts of people find all sorts of views objectionable. But you will not want the resources of the government and the money of Canadian taxpayers to go towards something that is damaging to the public. Over the past year, Common Ground, which has been around since the 1980s, published an article that claimed that COVID-19 measures have killed more people than the, quote, purported pandemic, unquote. It also ran an article suggesting children who receive the vaccine are at risk of developing cancer and becoming infertile later in life. The Public Health Agency of Canada has said repeatedly there is no evidence that COVID-19 vaccines cause fertility problems in women or men. So far, no credible study has shown a causal relationship between the vaccines and cancer. A Common Ground article alleging a link between the vaccines and cancer argued that the mRNA technology used to produce the most widespread COVID-19 vaccines changes DNA forever. But this is outrageous falsehood. Not according to a study at the Swedish University of Lund, which found out that it does just that in the liver, actually. How about that? Eh? But this is all, it's all falsehood. It's all falsehood. Now, yeah, let's just muck around with, RNA, DNA, or whatever. What's the worst that could happen? And let's hide the results of our tests for as long as we possibly can. That's what Pfizer did. And when this information started to be doled out, it was pretty interesting reading. Dale Smith at Extra writes, the occupation of downtown Ottawa was a warning about extremism's useful idiots. We've seen how craven U.S. politicians can get in the pursuit of votes. Are Canadian MPs next? Ooh. It was not an uncommon sight to see Conservative MPs and a few senators going to bat for the combined population of far-right extremists, grifters, conspiracy theorists, and grievance tourists who occupied downtown Ottawa for 3 weeks last month, both before they arrived and right up until the police action that forced them out. These politicians desired to claim some aspect of this movement and use them for their own purposes, fundraising, energy, volunteers, shifting what's called the Overton window by normalizing what had previously been considered radicalized discourse in a vain attempt to draw extremists into their orbit and extract their votes. But that relied on a whole lot of willful blindness and very, very selective engagement with the leadership of this occupation. Yes, it is true that some of the convoy leaders, very naive people, had very strange and false ideas about how Canada's government works. But as I explained yesterday, if these people had been in the elite, or if they had been in the aspirational class, they never would have undertaken the protest. In spite of this, Dale Smith writes, Conservatives played dumb and pretended that this memorandum of understanding and the plan to overthrow democracy was not existent or not serious. They pretended that the organizers weren't far-right extremists, despite the fact that they had not only racist, anti-Semitic, or Islamophobic beliefs, but also a long history of homophobic and transphobic ones as well. It's always, this is Extra, of course, is a homosexual or Alphabet People magazine. And it's always about these people. That's all they care about. Extremism, the sexual mutilation of children, that's not extremist. Who could dare claim such a thing? Making counseling against it, even by parents. If you're a 10-year-old girl tells you that she's now a boy and you counsel against this, you could be sent to prison in Canada for up to 5 years. But that is in no way extremist. Oh, and let's hear from Jen, not Jennifer, but Jen Gerson at her Substack. And you know what this invasion of the Ukraine is all about? About Tsarism. Yes, it's about Tsarism. Ooh, toxic vacuum. Oh, with peace, prosperity, and full tummies, we have more time to contemplate the apex of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs and find that our material requirements have been met at the expense of the spiritual ones. Is it any wonder we've grown so susceptible to fads and conspiracy theories? Oh, you mean like the climate emergency? Or that the coronavirus was an existential threat to humanity? How about that? How about that? Don't be surprised to see a surge in new religious movements and moral panics. This from the people who have been shoving moral panics down our throats for decades. It's just a sign of the times, people casting about in the search for purpose and tribe, and into this toxic vacuum. We also see state actors pursue their own agendas. Russia is particularly notorious for seeding social media feeds with news and information designed to polarize and divide Western nations. What's less studied is the underlying ideology that is motivating its actions. It's not communism, but rather an imperial Tsarist revival that combines totalitarianism, military conquest, and Orthodox Christianity. Boo! All of it subverted to the autocratic government's will. Ooh, those Orthodox Christians, they are so very, 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 very powerful. They're just behind everything sinister that's going on in the world. What do we see? We see Orthodox Christianity. It's everywhere. These people are everywhere. You can tell them they have long beards and headgear. Okay, those are a couple of clues. You know, if it's being suggested that you should do something, sinister, and you want to know whether an Orthodox Christian is behind it, well, start with the beard, okay? Well, here is a Russian Orthodox priest, Andrei Chakov, has some thoughts on in a video that he made, and it's all over Twitter, elsewhere in social media. He says, "We lived among the satanic chimera. You didn't know that? Have you noticed that the air has become cleaner to breathe? Puchacheva has left Russia forever. Lord, thank you. Pornhub is closed for Western users. Western civilization is turned off. Jesus, how hard did we need to pray for it to be closed earlier? We can't go to Eurovision. I prayed that we're never allowed there ever again. I never want to see women with mustaches and men with breasts, not even in a dream or in passing on a billboard. They've closed it all to us. Everything that is boastful, stinky, cursed at its roots, and through their guts it is cursed. It is a world about profit, lies, and bloodshed." Amen to that. Yes, here we have in toto the sinister plan of Orthodox Christians, because as we all know, Pornhub and Eurovision are essential to what we call liberal democracy. Let's have a look at the chat. Okay. Hello to Dr. Deadname. Yo Mama says the latest Pixar movie is one giant menarche metaphor. Ugh, sounds queasy. Hello to John S. and GSP, who says, God forbid, anger at the helpless mainstream media. GSP says, remember, Putin is funding the freedom truckers? Popcasso88 says, everything I don't like is Putin's fault. Cis information, says Chogakin666. Good one. I like that. Goobert Remover says, what happened to his eye? I've been gone for a while. I injured it. I didn't injure the eye. I injured the flesh and bone around it, and it's rather hideous. So that's why I am wearing the eye patch. It is less hideous than it was, but it's still pretty hideous. Perhaps by Monday, I can go without it. He tripped on a shoelace. Absolutely true. Hello to Martin Matushak, who cites the iron law of woke projection. Dr. Deadname points out that serious journalists do not use the word tummies. Yo Mama says, from his lips to God's ear. Indeed. But they've never really, in my lifetime, met with serious opposition. That would be the media, the progressives, says David the Gnome. That speech was on fire, says Gamion. Hello to Dionysus. And, okay. Let's move on here. Oh, Andrew Coyne, who has just gone stark raving mad. His latest, how would I say, pronunciamento, I think that would be appropriate, in the Globe and Mail. A message to conservatives: smarten up. Serious times need serious leaders. For much of the past decade, voters across the democratic world have indulged in the fantasy that they could elect, in essence, a bunch of clowns to lead them. Demagogues, dilettantes, billionaire brick throwers, people with no experience of or fitness for office, but only a talent for distraction. Politics was not about electing serious people to make serious decisions in a dangerous world. It was about sending a message or making a point or sticking it to the people we don't like. Or else it was about entertainment. It was only the government, after all. What was the worst that could happen? Oh, how did Justin Trudeau get to be prime minister then? Because of his socks? Because he was just such an adorable drama kid? Because he was just oh so dreamy that he sent the Canadian media and the Canadian elite, both female and male, into a psychosexual frenzy? And Coyne continues, Canadians are especially given to this sort of thinking. We imagine, no natural predators. We are likable, or at least we like us. We are rich. We are bounded by oceans on three sides, and our nearest neighbor and largest trading partner is the most powerful country on earth. Does it really matter all that much who leads us? We'll be all right. We'll get by. The past 2 weeks should have dispelled that illusion. Whether we know it or not, we are at war. We are not at war, you maniac. Those may not be our soldiers fighting in Ukraine, but they are our weapons, and that is our fight. We didn't have to send them the weapons. Vladimir Putin, it can no longer be denied, represents a singular threat to the democratic world. A leader who invades a neighbor for the sole purpose of extinguishing a nation democracy. So that's what the Ukraine is, a nation democracy, who levels whole cities in this pursuit. He hasn't leveled a single city, and who threatens any country that intervenes to stop the carnage with nuclear annihilation, and who can do this all entirely at his own, not necessarily rational discretion, is a creature out of our worst nightmares. The stakes could not possibly be higher. How many times have we heard this in our lifetime? The stakes cannot possibly be higher. And not only for the peace of the world. Oh, and Andrew Coyne, he reveled in NATO's terror bombing of Serbia. He reveled in the American invasion of Iraq and gnashed his teeth and rent his garments because Canada did not take part. He reveled in Canada's foolish, pointless, decade-long involvement in Afghanistan. This man is bloodthirsty. He's bloodthirsty. But, yeah. But the Conservative Party, he must be, Andrew Coyne, I suspect, is feeling anxious. Because what he's been telling us, for 30 years now is, process, just the same thing, only more so. Yeah, I will rail against the fact that all the parties sound the same, but when any party actually sticks its neck out, I will denounce them as being extremist. This is what the Conservative Party, will have to decide in their leadership race, whether it wants to be a serious party with serious ambitions of governing or a marginal party for marginal cranks. Marginal cranks? Are there any cranks that aren't marginal, Andrew Coyne? Again, this is not about ideology. Oh, and there's an exclamation point at the end of that sentence. A party that put forward radical proposals to raise Canadian productivity. What does that even mean? To restore order to our finances. Again, what does that even mean? To repair our bedraggled military. No one is interested in that. No one. Or to reform our dysfunctional democracy. Well, Andrew Coyne gets what he wants from it. So how is it dysfunctional? It works for him. Would be offering the country a useful alternative to the Liberals. With the right salesman, it could find a market. The country needs a self-confident, ideas-based Conservative Party. Andrew Coyne has no ideas whatsoever except, 100 million people living in Canada? Yes, he has actually proposed that. Most of all, it needs a party led by grown-ups who can persuade a nervous public that they have the character and judgment to lead the country through the dark days that might lie ahead, who can not only win, but might deserve to. It's like a papal blessing. That's what we're talking about here. The endorsement of Andrew Coyne. The Substack Remnant posting has a piece. Note, the science has not changed, and don't you forget it. Key facts were buried in the discourse, even among many COVID dissenters. Now the perpetrators want you to just move on, as if nothing happened. The last 2 years have certainly been a wild ride, haven't they, with the arrival of the Omicron variant. The institutions have finally pivoted towards an attitude of moving past COVID. A new flavor of COVID dissent has emerged, people declaring that they're done with COVID. In February 2022, a YouGov poll found that 4 in 10 vaccinated Americans say that we need to learn to live with COVID. The COVID mongers have seen the writing on the wall and are ready for the panic to be over now that it has outlived its usefulness. The new narrative is that the science has changed, even for committed propagandists. Take Leanna Wen, who has spent the entire pandemic advocating measures extreme as, quote, banning the unvaccinated from leaving their homes, unquote. But is this really true? Much of the new science being passed down by the press sounds more like a series of confessions than new developments. The narrative pivot isn't the product of an honest mistake. The notion that COVID is over is as surreal as any of the previous hysteria painting COVID as the end of the world, since the idea of a dire emergency coming to an end is premised on the notion that it was ever an emergency to begin with. Even now, at time of publication in March 2022, so-called COVID deaths appear to be just as common as they were during the initial panic that began our collective descent into madness. For anyone with basic critical thinking skills, it should have been obvious long ago that something wasn't adding up. The public portrayal of the data, of what was true and what was misinformation, seems entirely political. No other explanation makes any sense. So how exactly did that misrepresentation happen? Let's go to Steve Kirsch's Substack. Mask mandates don't work, so they will be extended. The two mandates that do work won't be used anywhere. We extend the mandates that do nothing, and we ignore the mandates that would work. That's just the way science works in today's world. Get used to it. 1, mask mandates don't work at all, so they're being extended on public transportation. 2, there are 2 mandates based on science that are effective. 1, if you are sick, stay home until your symptoms resolve. And 2, if you exhibit COVID symptoms, start a proven early treatment protocol immediately. Unfortunately for us, no public health official is ever going to mandate either measure. It would make too much sense to do that. The mandate that does nothing other than piss people off is extended for a month. Mask mandates on public transport have been extended in the United States for another month, even though they don't work. And here's something else from Steve Kirsch. This doctor's alarming observations are sufficient to halt the COVID vaccines in the U.S. On March 5th, a Midwestern doctor, who I will abbreviate as AMD, published a long Substack article that meticulously chronicled his or her observations of adverse events associated with the COVID vaccine. This is very rare, as most doctors are too busy to do such an analysis. Based on the observation of this one doctor alone, the critical event rates are high enough to justify that the vaccines should be immediately halted based on safety concerns. And yes, who are the people that matter? TikTok creators. Apparently so. And this is from the fabulous Taylor Lorenz, who somehow managed to get the Wayback Machine to remove all references to her tweets. Yeah, that sounds pretty powerful. The White House is briefing TikTok users about the war in Ukraine. With millions getting their information about the war from the platform, the administration wants to get its message to top content creators. So, apparently the United States and Canada became the Soviet Union gradually that no one noticed. On Thursday afternoon, 30 top TikTok stars gathered on a Zoom call to receive key information about the war unfolding in Ukraine. This is, again, one of those sentences which just, I don't know, like 3 years ago, no one would have understood it. I'll just repeat that. 30 top TikTok stars gathered on a Zoom call to receive key information about the war unfolding in Ukraine. National security staffers and White House press secretary Jen Psaki, briefed the influencers about the United States' strategic goals in the region and answered questions on distributing aid to Ukrainians working with NATO and how the United States would react to a Russian use of nuclear weapons. Oh, really? This is determined? They don't have a clue because no one's taking that seriously. It's never happened before. As the crisis in Ukraine has escalated, millions have turned to TikTok for information on what is happening there in real time. TikTok videos offered some of the first glimpses of the Russian invasion, and since then the platform has been a primary outlet for spreading news to the masses abroad. Ukrainian citizens hiding in bomb shelters or fleeing their homes have shared their stories to the platform, while dangerous misinformation and Russian propaganda have also spread. Yeah, until, those accounts get deplatformed. And TikTok stars, many with millions of followers, have increasingly sought to make sense of the crisis for their audiences. The blind leading the blind, or more to the point, the idiots leading the idiots. The White House has been closely watching TikTok's rise as a dominant news source, leading to its decision to approach a select group of the platform's most influential names. This week, the administration began working with Gen Z for Change, a nonprofit advocacy group. Oh, another one of these NGOs that runs the world, to help identify top content creators on the platform to orchestrate a briefing aimed at answering questions about the conflict and the United States' role in it. Victoria Hammett, Deputy Executive Director, they not only have an executive director, they have a deputy executive director of Gen Z for Change, contacted dozens with invitations via email and gathered potential questions for the Biden administration. The invitations to the event were distributed Tuesday and Wednesday. Khalil Green, 21, a creator with more than 534,000 followers on TikTok, said he wasn't surprised when an invitation arrived in his email inbox. People in my generation get all our information from TikTok, he said. That sounds wise. It's the first place we're searching up new topics and learning about things. So, he figured it made sense that the Biden administration would engage people like him on the platform. The briefing was led by Matt Miller, a special advisor for communications at the White House National Security Council, and Psaki. The Washington Post obtained a recording of the call, and in it, Biden officials stressed the power these creators had in communicating with their followers. We recognize this is a critically important avenue in the way the American public is finding out about the latest, said the White House Director of Digital Strategy, Rob Flaherty. So we wanted to make sure you had the latest information from an authoritative source, the government of the United States. Jules Turpak, a Gen Z content creator who makes TikTok essays about digital culture, said the White House's decision to engage creators such as she was essential to helping stop the spread of misinformation. Because if the government says it, it must be true. Those who have an audience can ideally set the tone for how others decide to assess and amplify what they see online. After the call, several influencers said they felt more empowered, yay, to debunk misinformation and communicate effectively about the crisis. TikTok has been overrun with false and misleading news since the war broke out. And on Thursday, the company said it would begin labeling state-controlled media on its platform. Which kind of state-controlled media? American-controlled state media, perhaps? Nah, no need to do that because, they never tell lies. Never, 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 never. And, oh, yes, let's go to Eugippius. German anesthesiologists, we will not treat Russian and Belarusian citizens. Our solidarity is with the Ukrainian people. More craziness from Munich doctors who appear to have hatched a private sanctions plan of their own, premised on owning Putin by unilaterally refusing to treat Russians. Remember Astrid Steinlein, director of the Ludwig Maximilians Universität Clinic for Human Genetics? She's the one who declared that, quote, due to the serious violation of international law by the autocrat Putin, who is obviously mentally disturbed, she would be refusing to treat Russian patients. Well, that wasn't an isolated case, and now it looks like various Munich physicians got together and worked out this informal sanctions regime among themselves. A few days later, a similar announcement from a private Munich clinic came to light, dating from around the same time and bearing exactly the same message, only in more inflammatory terms. Dear colleagues, we strongly condemned the invasion of the Russian army with the help of the Belarusian government. Russia is not only attacking Ukraine militarily without any justification. This country also threatens Europe. This country threatens our freedom and democracy. Therefore, from now on and until further notice, we will not treat Russian and Belarusian citizens. You can save yourself the trouble of registering. There will be no exceptions, just as COVID-19 and Mr. Putin make no exceptions. In case of doubt, we will dismiss the patients on the day of surgery. This also applies to patients who have already registered. Our solidarity is with the Ukrainian people and our measures are the consequences of the military invasion of the Russian army. Yes. After an uproar, the clinic posted a bright red apology on their website and also on Facebook. The reaction to our letter has greatly affected us and made us think. Our intention was to express sympathy with the Ukrainian people and, as other companies have done, to cut business ties with Russia and send a message of support. This idea was not thought through in its entirety at the time. Some have justly criticized the force of our letter, and we accept its criticism in full. Far be it from us to discriminate or exclude patients on the basis of their origin. We apologize for creating this impression. We will continue to treat Russian and Belarusian patients without hesitation. As a sign of our solidarity, we are donating 10,000 euros to Doctors Without Borders to support their mission in Ukraine. UJPS comments, wonder of wonders, their aversion to treating Russians didn't run that deep at all. As soon as it earned them derision and failed to gain them any virtue points, they were happy to go back to anesthetizing Russians along with everybody else. Of course, these three lunatics mentioned Corona in the course of justifying their lunacy. As I said earlier, Corona has politicized the medical profession, and we are seeing what happens when doctors start to think they have special political responsibilities. And all of those deep philosophical debates we had about the freedom that doctors enjoy to refuse to treat the unvaccinated are now bearing fruit. Let's go to Alex Berenson's Substack. The world's favorite veterinarian tells on himself. Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla, excuse me, Dr. Albert Bourla, is even more of a megalomaniac than any of us realized. Pfizer's mRNA COVID shot sure works great. Not against COVID. It doesn't prevent infection, transmission, symptomatic disease, hospitalization, intubation, or death from COVID. But it has successfully boosted the ego of Albert Bourla, Pfizer's chairman and chief executive, to a level rarely seen outside Hollywood or cults. Think Donald Trump with less self-awareness, Joe Biden with less dementia, Tom Cruise 6 inches taller. Pfizer's media relations team managed to keep the world from learning the depths of Bourla's self-love for 2 years, seemingly by strictly limiting Bourla's public appearances. These days, however, Bourla has a book about his mRNA shot to promote. It's called Moonshot, inside Pfizer's 9-month race to make the impossible possible. Spoiler alert, Moonshot is selling roughly 50 copies a day on Amazon, despite the fact that it came out Tuesday and has had a massive publicity campaign. Don't worry, I doubt anyone will tell St. Albert. Now, hold up there, Big Al. And take a look at the dailyskeptic.org, or just dailyskeptic.org. And vaccine safety update. You could find it there. Airline Trade Association calls for end of face masks for air travel. An essay, The Real Truth About Viruses. Yes, everyone became an expert on viruses, and the subtle science lie at the heart of the net zero agenda. Nearly 140 science papers have been identified that cast doubt on the dominant role that carbon dioxide is said to play in the global atmospheric temperature. According to the climate site No Trick Zone, the list has grown significantly from 50 in 2016. Much of the ongoing science debate, ignored by almost all media, concerns equilibrium climate sensitivity, ECS, the increase in the global temperature that will follow a doubling of atmospheric carbon dioxide. When green activists talk of settled science, they refer to their certainty that humans drive all or most of the changes in the climate. But this political certitude is far from settled among scientists, notably those who study physics and chemistry. Nobody actually knows what the ECS figure is, so estimates are made all the way up to 6 degrees Celsius. These are then used in climate models, which have spent the last 40 years producing inaccurate forecasts. In addition, a worst-case prediction or pathway called RCP 8.5 assumes that temperatures will rise by 5 degrees Celsius in less than 80 years. This pathway was quoted in 57% of the disaster scenarios in the recent Doomsday IPCC report. No Trick Zone highlighted a recent paper from the German physics professor Dieter Schildknecht from Bielefeld University. This work suggested that a further atmospheric increase of carbon dioxide beyond 300 parts per million, it currently stands at around 418 parts per million, cannot lead to an appreciably stronger absorption of radiation and consequently cannot affect the Earth's climate. This finding is one of the many that suggest the ability of carbon dioxide to radiate heat back to the Earth's surface declines rapidly after a certain point. Professor Schildknecht finds that doubling CO2 leads to 0.5 degrees Celsius warming as absorption reaches close to 100%. He concludes that the effect of an anthropogenic CO2 increase on the Earth's climate is fairly negligible. Has the West got a leg to stand on when it complains of Putin's disregard for international law and other moral norms? Yeah, let's look at Serbia again in 1999. Oh, let's just carve off one of Serbia's provinces because Serbia is being mean to the Muzzies. And let's terror bomb Belgrade. This was an admission made in the Washington Post by American Lieutenant General Short. You could look it up. He didn't use the word terror. What he said was, we'll just keep bombing Belgrade, and the people there will decide that they need a change in government or whatever. This is against international law. It's against the Nuremberg Code. It is considered a war crime. But somehow Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, and Jean Chrétien have not been dragged to The Hague in shackles for some reason. I can't imagine what that reason might be. And let's look at this here. Oh, the interesting tweet storm by a fellow called Salazzo. The richest man in history created the pharmaceutical machine that is keeping you sick. Here's how John D. Rockefeller did it. Western medicine has a focus on drugs, surgery, and radiation. Preventative diets and holistic practices are highly discouraged by doctors. In fact, health practitioners who prescribe these things are seen as quacks and cast off by Western medicine. In the U.S., we are not in the practice of healthcare. We are in the practice of sick care. And here is some data. 70% of U.S. adults are overweight or obese. 1 in 3 Americans are pre-diabetic. 7 out of 10 deaths are caused by chronic illness. Heart disease kills 500,000 Americans yearly. And there's a graph of obesity prevalence in the U.S. adults from 1960 to 2016. And in 1960, it was about 14%, and now it has risen to about 40%. We are also in a prescription drug epidemic due to our ties with big pharma and our tendency to overprescribe. Currently, 16 million Americans abuse prescription drugs. 2 million prescription drug users are addicted. 4 out of 5 pharmacy-filled prescriptions are opioids. In the United States, painkillers. Annual abusers, 9.7 million. Opioids alone, 9.3 million. Sedatives, 5.9 million. Stimulants, 4.9 million. Benzodiazepine alone, 4.8 million. And all prescription drugs, 16.3 million. It's a piece from The Conservative Woman. Grooming Gangs, the Lessons Not Learned by Tal Tiagi. Last month, a report by the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse censured local authorities for failing to investigate networks sexually exploiting children. Lessons have not been learned from prosecutions of grooming gangs who tortured tens of thousands of children throughout the 1990s and 2000s. Unless dark chapters are re-examined and complicit authorities of the past are punished, this will persist. February's review looked at 6 local authority areas not previously covered by previous investigations. It found Durham recorded sex between prepubescent girls and men in their 20s as consensual. St. Helens labeled children promiscuous. Tower Hamlets described predators as boyfriends. In the aftermath of abuse, help isn't offered. 10-year-olds plied with narcotics who contract sexually transmitted infections are merely deemed at risk. There is a widespread failure to record perpetrators' ethnicity. A misplaced sense of political correctness was posited as an explanation. Considering Labour's desperate denials of Muslim, particularly Pakistani, overrepresentation in grooming, ignoring study after study, it's no surprise that 5 of the 6 councils criticized are Labour strongholds. Places notorious for grooming, such as Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford, Manchester, Huddersfield, Bradford, Newcastle, and Oxford, have been staunchly Labour for decades. The J report found at least 1,400 children were molested in Rotherham between 1997 and 2013. In 2006, a Conservative councillor requested a meeting with Roger Stone, the Rotherham Council Labour leader, at which he expressed his constituents' worries about the widespread grooming of their children. He was told that the matters were being dealt with and asked not to raise the issue publicly. Jane Sr., a former youth worker, broached the subject, but was met with indifference and scorn. Because perpetrators were predominantly British Pakistanis, several councillors believed addressing this could give oxygen to racism. There were fears about the British National Party, which had weaponized the issue, winning 2 council seats in 2008. Addressing the problem head-on could have allowed Rotherham Labour to steal the far right's thunder, restoring trust in the mainstream. Instead, council workers remembered sweeping under the carpet, turning a blind eye, and keeping a lid on it. One interviewee recalled, "The people above just didn't want to know." Extreme PC culture may explain Labour-run council conduct, but did this extend to police who didn't seriously investigate grooming gangs for over a decade? Between the ages of 11 to 16, Cassie Pike was trafficked around England and raped by over 100 men. West Yorkshire police arrested her, not her abusers. When she was fed with A-class drugs to force sex, police issued her a warning for possession. After getting into a groomer's car, Cassie was arrested for facilitating a child sex crime. Thames Valley Police looked the other way for 16 girls when up to 373 children were abused. They failed to spot a vulnerable girl who vanished from a children's home more than 100 times. Following the death of Victoria Agogolia, a 15-year-old girl living in a care home run by Manchester City Council, who was injected with heroin by a 50-year-old Asian man, Greater Manchester Police finally took action. Well, what do we learn from this story, this horrific story of the grooming gangs? Well, when you bring the third world to your countries become the third world. And since it is racist, by definition, to criticize so-called BIPOCs for anything, or any kind of behavior, it means that this behavior, however horrific, will flourish. And those who speak out against it will be demonized and canceled. That's what we learn about this, that diversity is not our strength, that diversity is, well, it's the destruction of civilization, or at least our civilization. Speaking of diversity, multiculturalism, where there are no standards anymore. This is from Ashley Hadwani at Victoria News. Amid staffing shortages in healthcare, BC is implementing a new program that prioritizes the immigration of skilled workers in that sector. Municipal Affairs Minister Nathan Cullen said in a statement Thursday that the goal is to place a greater focus on various kinds of healthcare workers and social workers within the framework of the province's immigration nominee program. Changes also immediately provide a pathway to permanent residence for people already living in BC and working in these sectors. In addition to prioritizing physiotherapists, pharmacists, nurses, and other specialty practices, the province is also adding healthcare assistants to the predetermined list of in-demand jobs. So apparently what British Columbia needs are nurses, pharmacists, social workers, physiotherapists, and the like, who can neither speak fluently in English or understand English. How could that go wrong? Well, I'll give you an example. The late Thomas Szasz, the psychiatrist and great writer, he wondered about the issue of psychiatric hospitals from the 1940s onwards, just doping patients to the gills with Thorazine, a very powerful drug which, in fact, turns people into zombies. Well, Zaz had, an inside track on that because he was an immigrant from Hungary. And he explained that a great many of the physicians who worked in state psychiatric facilities were like him, immigrants. And so they didn't speak English or understand English very well. And they were not well versed in, say, American culture. So if someone seemed troublesome, well, whatever explanations they might have for their behavior was clearly gibberish. So just whack them with Thorazine. And, oh, yes, speaking of drugs, we have a drugs crisis in British Columbia. And the solution, of course, is more drugs. This is from Les Lane at the Victoria Times Colonist. BC officials are more openly acknowledging the policy failures that are reflected in the drug overdose statistics. So a new approach is being recommended that could involve more unspecified provincial emergency powers and legislative changes. The numbers speak for themselves. The death rate has climbed astronomically even after a public health emergency was declared to tackle the crisis. But the government's stance over the years was to sidestep around why deaths were going up. There was emphasis on optimistic expectations that various new ideas might work. The fact was nothing was working was downplayed. A comprehensive death review report released Wednesday was more forthright. Just the fact that it was conducted was telling. It's the second one in 4 years to look at overdose deaths. The first one was struck after 1,854 people died in less than 2 years due to illicit toxic drugs. It made more than a dozen recommendations to the government to curb the fatalities. Result, the death toll climbed to more than 8,700 in the following years, a number that would have been inconceivable in the early going. Yes, and for decades, the City of Victoria, the government of British Columbia, the federal government, how can we be nicer to junkies? Let's give them cookies and orange juice and safe spaces to shoot up. And we'll put little boxes up there all around Victoria for the safe dispersal of used needles. And guess what? The easier that they have made it for drug users, drugs are effectively decriminalized, all of them in Canada, but apparently it doesn't go far enough. This is from the Canadian Press. More than 20 advocacy organizations, those wonderful NGOs, are urging the federal minister of mental health and addictions to not require quantity limits from jurisdictions requesting to decriminalize simple drug possession. Legal and health organizations have asked Carolyn Bennett to waive the need for jurisdictions to set threshold amounts and requests for exemption from criminal penalties for those who carry small amounts of illicit drugs for personal use. The coalition, which includes the HIV Legal Network and BC Centre on Substance Abuse, by the way, illegal drugs, big business, not just for the people who manufacture and sell them, but for all the caring professions and NGOs. These groups said that if thresholds are set too low, drug users who purchase above the limit will be continued to be criminalized, especially those who are, wait for it, racialized and low income. Racialized. And here's a very interesting story from Unheard. Incel power. South Korea's incel election. Young conservatives claim to be the victims of feminism by S. Nathan Park. Conservatives in South Korea should be in a tricky position. The nation is currently led by a liberal who is the most popular president in its democratic history. Moon Jae-in's administration oversaw one of the world's best responses to the pandemic. And under his leadership, the Korean economy has been roaring, even as much of the developed world has struggled. The last conservative president, meanwhile, was disastrous. Park Geun-hye was impeached, removed from office, and later convicted for corruption. And yet, with the presidential election less than a month away, the conservative candidate Yoon Seok-yeol is showing a slight edge in polling over his liberal rival Lee Jae-myung. How have the country's conservatives been able to regroup in just 5 years? A major reason for this resurgence is the sharp conservative turn of young South Korean men who are increasingly animated by aggressive misogyny and anti-feminism. These young men have found their champion in Lee Jun-seok, a 36-year-old Harvard-educated political pundit who became the leader of the conservative opposition party last summer. Warning of the totalitarian tendency of feminism and accusing the ruling Democratic Party of fixating on a pro-women agenda, Lee and his supporters have injected a jolt of energy into the South Korean right. Yes, and this the writer frets about sexism and misogyny. And the young generation's misogyny was marked by the over-the-top hostility against feminism. 59% of South Korean men in their 20s said they strongly opposed feminism, with 26% rating the intensity of their opposition as 12 on a scale of 0 to 12. Unlike older men who held to a patriarchal worldview defined by rigid gender roles, young men reject the sense of masculine duty that typically accompanies old school sexism. Oh, yeah, masculine duty, old school sexism. Okay. Rather, they see themselves as victims of feminism and define themselves politically by this sense of victimization. Among young South Koreans, gender is emerging as the primary dividing line between liberals and conservatives. For the older generation, politics was largely about attitudes towards South Korea's dictators and the democracy movement of the 1970s and 80s. But for South Koreans under 30 who were born into a wealthy and secure democracy, debates about whether economic growth is more important than freedom are no longer relevant. Today's young people came of age after the Asian financial crisis of 1997 had destroyed South Korea's previous model of lifetime employment, and they have spent their entire lives preparing and taking a series of ruthlessly competitive examinations for prestigious high schools, then colleges, then large corporations. Instead of poverty and oppression, their main struggle is to achieve economic security in a society that is often brutal to those who lose out. Yes. Since 2009, more women have attended college than men, and in some standardized examinations, they dominate to such an extent that men now benefit from affirmative action. Well, we've seen what happens with educated women, particularly those who have university degrees or postgraduate degrees. They stop having children. They stop having children. The effect of rising autonomy among young women is particularly visible in dating and family formation. In a 2021 study that surveyed residents of Seoul, only 58% of men in their 20s said they had sex in the past year, a lower rate than for men in their 60s. The numbers were similar among women in their 20s, but for a different reason. While most celibate men said they didn't have sex because they couldn't find a partner, most celibate women said it was because they had no interest in sex. Young Korean women are also increasingly skeptical of marriage and childbirth. According to a survey by the magazine CBC, only 8.1% of young women and 0% of self-identified feminists agreed with the statement, people must marry, versus 37% of the population overall. And South Korea's fertility rate, which fell to 0.84 births per woman in 2020, is the lowest in the world. And if current trends continue, in about 3 generations, there will be no more South Koreans. It would seem to me that a policy or a series of policies which leads to extinction is not good. But I suppose the GDP will keep rising until the point where it simply collapses because there's no economy left, because there's no South Koreans left. Are the South Koreans, are they the new Shakers then? Could be. Here is some news about personal computing, and I think it's important. This is from Hannah Nightingale from the Post-Millennial. Following an announcement from DuckDuckGo founder and CEO Gabriel Weinberg that the search engine would be downranking websites associated with so-called Russian disinformation, former users of the platform announced that they would be abandoning it in favor of Brave. Luke Melks, vice president of business operations for Brave, released a tweet on Thursday welcoming new people to use not just their browser, but their private search engine as well. Remember, friends, Brave is more than just a browser. We also have a neutral private Brave search. User first means getting out of your way, get in. Well, I have used the Brave browser for about 3 years now, and I'm very pleased with it. And I like a browser that is not spying on me And I have decided that my search engine is going to be Brave and no longer DuckDuckGo. And I recommend to you all that you do the same. Lights, camera, Ukraine. This is a tweet thread by an Englishman who calls himself Les Luther. Illusion Warfare Report, The Road to Ukraine. Join me as I LARP my way onto the Hollywood movie set we know as Ukraine. Will the Matrix allow me to peek behind the curtains of a manufactured and manipulated world-staged event? The journey begins. On March the 3rd, I took a flight from Luton, England to Krakow, Poland. Via Poland seemed the easiest way into the Ukraine. Even though unvaxxed, I entered Poland with ease on the condition I left within 24 hours. So I wasted no time and took a train from Krakow to Przemysl. I'm sure I'm not saying that right. The only sign of war was the name of the cafe. Lights, camera, action. Przemysl train station, the refugee movie set. A well-planned stage-managed route ensures the Ukrainians arriving are bottlenecked and compressed into the ticket hall so the media can create the illusion of hell on earth. Visual effects are key. Outside the refugee train station, police vehicles leave the lights flashing. Every 20 minutes, the sirens turn on and the vehicle does a loop around the block. Stage management. The video village of Przemysl. Here we see the director and producer of the refugee movie. All stage photos need good lighting. I'm unable to find a hostel or hotel full of refugees. No, all the hotels in this town are taken up by the press. Whilst these scumbags sleep in luxury, poor Ukrainians are left to sleep at the railway station, creating more staged photo opportunities for the press. 1 minute walk away from the movie set and life is normal, creating a scene. Here you can see, and this is all illustrated with videos that Les Luther took. Here you can see how perfectly fine doors are blocked by signs and volunteers, aka stagehands. Bottlenecking everyone through one door, the camera crew set up to capture this manufacturing chaos where the cameras strike a pose. You LARP as a photographer, I'll LARP as a young man heading off to war. The train into Lviv, Ukraine. Lviv, Ukraine railway station, another movie set. I arrive around 2 a.m. I help an old lady with her bags as she seeks information on travel to her hometown of Odessa. Once she is sorted with tickets, I take a closer look around. Lviv railway station, manufactured chaos once again. A curfew is enforced from 8 p.m. till 8 a.m., meaning travelers can't leave the station and are forced into participating in the fully immersive 4D crisis experience, complete with props like the trash can fire. The train into Kiev. I talk my way onto the overnight train, around 5 pounds and a warm place to sleep. There are many Ukrainians heading back in. Just for the record, you can buy a regular train ticket into Kiev, either online or at the station. Trains are running as normal. On March the 4th, I arrived. Filming around Kiev train station was near impossible. Texting on the phone was okay. The moment you turned the phone into the filming position, Agent Smith with guns would appear. I got pulled inside twice within 10 minutes, so I left. I take a walk to the supermarket. No signs of a war yet. Only the very familiar feeling of a lockdown. Is this the result of war, or is this the government and corporations creating the illusion of a war to economically force people out of the city? The media claimed intense fighting had reached Kiev. I walk the street and see no evidence of this as of yet. This is the 6th of March. My first air raid siren, and no one cares. Audio sound effects are another way to create the illusion of war. Illusion warfare tactics. Shut everyone inside for a curfew and blast sirens across the city to scare the shit out of people. There is never a follow-up explosion. Everyone told me there are no hotels or hostels in Kiev. It's a war zone. Truth is, there are an abundance of places to stay. I picked a cheap hostel as I'm on a budget. So everyone understands, I'm a nightclub bouncer with about 1,000 pounds to my name. Each day I wake up, grab a coffee, and continue to walk the streets in search of a war. I gave up on taxi drivers on day one. They wanted cash, which is hard to find in Kiev as all ATMs are dry. But understandably, they didn't want the attention of driving a foreigner to Irpin. Kiev, Ukraine. Grannies walk their dogs as normal. The reporters wear flak jackets. The city of Kiev is now a movie set. Come experience the illusion of war as we walk through the Hollywood set known as Kiev. Props such as abandoned cars, blockades, and checkpoints are placed around the city by the visual effects team for a fully immersive 4D experience. Tip: always carry an item and receipt whilst walking around a movie set like Kiev. There are many Agent Smith in blacked out vehicles driving around. There is lots of food in Kiev. If there are people in the city that can't eat, it's more likely because they have been economically destroyed by the government shutting down any way to earn a living. Alcohol has been prohibited. I walk in the direction of Irpin and come across this hospital. There's armed guards outside, so I film the side. Irpin is a 30-minute drive away. Wouldn't there be sounds of war and wounded soldiers? Just think with this blank canvas how much digital overlay fakery is possible. I walk and walk. Getting onto the Irpin film set is near impossible. The metro is open and running, but has armed police that want to search you before you enter. It's papers, please, even for regular Ukrainians. Kaboom! Has a bomb landed close by? Nope. The boiler fell off the wall and the water is spraying across the shower room, slowly flooding the first floor. Good news is I get moved to a room with a heater. The 8th of March. And blizzard with coffee to start the morning. After endless walking around the city for the past few days, I decide to revisit Kiev's main train station. Another manipulated crisis situation that could be avoided if the government really cared about its people. Still no visible signs of a war in the city. Kiev is the big cheese, is this illusion. I have no interest in the hundreds of ex-Soviet empty and derelict villages. The military has been using those villages for target practice and war games since the USSR fell. The more people that leave Kiev, the more the city becomes a blank canvas. Just think of how many soldiers fighting they could digitally add to this scene. The noose is tightening around the capital. A reporter in Kiev train station wearing a flak jacket whilst nobody else is. It's true, the station was mad busy a few days ago, but he has perfectly placed himself on the walkway. The lower levels are empty these days. The Q movement in Kiev. Les Luther says, I would encourage people to look up the art of queuing. Disney has invested billions into the psychological research of queuing. Queuing is a demoralizing activity and very important in all psychology operations. And action, cue the tank. One tank drives down the street. Do you think he's driving the long way to the front lines, or is this part of the illusion, ordering one tank down the street to scare people? Believe it or not, whilst I was filming this, I had an army guy walking 2 steps behind me. I didn't know, of course. He asked what I was doing there. I just replied, Google said there was a supermarket close by. Do you know where it is? He spoke good English. He was a nice guy. Running out of food, they say. Or maybe they are not allowed to work and earn money. Maybe their right to ignore this and carry on living has been taken away. Maybe the innocent Ukrainians are becoming economically forced into LARPing this war. Filmed on the 9th of March. The battle for Kiev. Active fighting has hit the streets, they said. Russian tanks rolling in, they said. I beg to differ, good sir. And again, this is from Red Reader, and the account is at LEZLUTHOR. One, would have thought, with everyone having a smartphone, with the ability to record sound and video and sound concurrently, that the reporting that we would get of this invasion would be better than we've had in the past. Instead, it's been worse because social media and the regular media are pretty much just adjuncts of NATO and the global American empire. So, no. Again, people who point out that the narrative is false get deplatformed, and they are deemed guilty of misinformation or disinformation, and they are called, extremists, terrorists. You know the drill. And every time I go to RT, which isn't frequently, I get this Cloudflare warning or whatever. And I touched on this yesterday, but I'm going to mention it again because just how horrifying it is. Facebook and Instagram to allow calls for violence against Russians. Meta's social media platforms have eased their hate speech policies to permit calls for the death of some Russians. The revised rules on violence and incitement will apply in certain countries, such as Ukraine and Poland, and will allow violent rhetoric against Russians and Russian soldiers. The policy change was first reported by Reuters Thursday, citing internal emails from Meta Platforms, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram. Reuters' initial headline said Facebook and Instagram to temporarily allow calls for violence against Russians, though it was later changed to Facebook temporarily allows posts on Ukraine war calling for violence against invading Russians or Putin's death, after Meta spokesman Andy Stone called the media outlet's take sensational. Yeah, killing is bad, except when you're killing bad people. Let's have a look at the American Sun and Ryan Landry's list of winners and losers for this week. Winners. Refugee NGOs, money will pour in, and if we calculate for their maliciousness, the money won't go to war refugee programs, but more barges for the Libyan human trafficking program. Boomers. They get their Cold War programming activated for a baddie they have familiarity with and a solid opponent. It is a nation state and a long-time opponent. This is comforting in the chaotic period of their sunset years. And the final winner, metals miners. If the Russians embargo the West or the West bans Russian materials, good times ahead for them. Losers, commuters, gas blowing through summer averages in March. Third world peasants. The few wealthy in the third world will eat fine, but the elimination of agricultural exports from Russia and Ukraine will crush the peasants. Food inflation led to the Arab Spring, could happen again. Russian artists. Some of the best artists in the world are being removed from galleries, bookshelves, dance troupes, and orchestras due to a psychotic hysteria. Let's go back to the chat. I'm curious about that Russian column that was apparently ambushed as Token 666. They've had air support, which was filming, so why no retaliatory strike? I don't know. Hello to Jean Betard de Precariat. The best president was a member of the feminist moon goddess cult, says Chogokin 666. What does David the Gnome have to say? The grooming thing in UK is particularly blood boiling. I remember there was some posts on Poll regarding a sort of very nasty type of feminism appearing in South Korea. Yeah, they don't do things by half measures in Korea. Nothing is done by half measures there. KMG's Dr. Strangelove impression, says Dr. Dead Name. And here's the Daily Sting from Don Willis. Turn the clock to zero, buddy. Don't want to be no fuddy-duddy. We're starting up a brand new day. And he adds, KMG dancing to Sting on TikTok would win the culture war. Dr. Deadname asks, what happened to kids being rebellious and contemptuous of authority? Oh, no, but they still are. Because, it's patriarchal, white cis males who run the world and brook no opposition. Your mama says, go, Putin, go. Satanic chimera, very accurate, as says Gamian. Indeed it is. And, now this is fascinating. Okay, so we have a Russian invasion of Ukraine and a potential humanitarian catastrophe. But what's the most important thing? The alphabet people. Yeah. How are the alphabet people faring? This is from John Cody at Remix News. The European Parliament voted Thursday morning in favor of imposing sanctions on Hungary and Poland. It's two member states that have received the largest number of Ukrainian refugees following the invasion by Russia on February 24th. The EU legislative body supported the call for the European Commission to place immediate sanctions on the two countries by a vote of 478 to 155. In a press release published shortly after Thursday's vote, the European Parliament insisted it was high time for the European Commission to start taking steps to protect the EU budget from member states who ignore the bloc's rule of law. EU lawmakers insisted that taxpayers' money must be protected against those who undermine the EU's values. In essence, it means that if conservative countries dissent against the liberal European mainstream on how to govern, for example, Hungary's passing of legislation which prohibited alphabet people propaganda to be taught in schools or rejects mass immigration, the offending country could be refused access to European funds they are entitled to. Yes, got to keep your eyes on the prize. This is from ABC News. Russia threatens to abandon American astronaut in space as sanctions threaten peace aboard the International Space Station. The plan for astronaut Mark Vandehei to land in Kazakhstan with 2 Russian cosmonauts on a Russian spacecraft. Well, yeah, apparently, oh yes, the United States says, this cooperation is going to go ahead, but how can it go ahead? Since Russia is the evilest country on earth. Russia is evil personified. Let's check out the hysteria at the Drudge Report. Fortress Kiev. I'm sorry, not Kiev. It's Kyiv. Putin bombs disabled care home. Yes, of course he did. Israel to Zelensky. Surrender. Oh, that's interesting. That is interesting. Let's take a look at the story. This is from Barak Ravitwala at the Jerusalem Post. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett told Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky that he recommends Ukraine take the offer made by Russian President Vladimir Putin to end the war, which includes many Ukrainian sacrifices, in a phone call Tuesday, according to an official in Ukraine's government. According to the official, Zelensky did not take Bennett's advice. The source claimed that the phone call was initiated by Bennett. If I were you, I would think about the lives of my people and take the offer, Bennett reportedly said. Zelensky's response was short, I hear you. Bennett told us to surrender, said the official. We have no intention of doing so. We know Putin's offer is only the beginning. Well, it's pretty much the same offer he's been making for years. Moscow widens assault in Ukraine, raising fears of humanitarian disaster. Grinds forward at heavy cost. Middle East volunteers deployed. Odessa prepares for attack. And of course, we spell Odessa with one S now because that's Ukrainian somehow. Armed men detain mayor and occupy city. Even state TV pleading with Putin to stop. Warsaw overwhelmed as it becomes key refugee destination. 2.5 million people have now fled. The people who have fled they're not in danger. The people in Western Ukraine are not in danger. You know that in recent years, there's been a vast number of Ukrainians leaving the Ukraine for Poland. Now Poland is about to be inundated or overrun by them. Economic migrants, I believe they're called. British public asked to take in. Americans will sacrifice more than most. Endgame elusive. Fears of false flag to lure Belarus into war. More projection here. And yes, Bette Midler, you all know Bette Midler, right? She has an adorable picture of a young, a Ukrainian child, I would guess, say 2 or 3 years old, bundled up against the cold with what appear to be, like little wings at the back, angel wings or something, and holding a Ukrainian flag. And Bette Midler says, I'd happily pay more for gas for her. I'd happily pay more gas for her. Things got pretty fierce over this, with people pointing out that Bette Midler is rich. Bette Midler has been rich for a long time. And someone called MetroRandom42 responded, I won't. I'm struggling as it is. Can you help me first? My mom died of COVID and I'm waiting on FEMA to repay me for funeral costs so I can pay taxes, and my rent increased $300 a month. Someone called Proud Liberal Vet, out and proud alphabet people, U.S. Army vet, responded, I am sorry for your loss and I hope things improve for you, but I can't help but ask how effing privileged must you be? You are safe and warm and no one is dropping bombs on you. So this is the new bottom line. Americans have no right to complain unless they are being bombed. Have you got it? This is all part of the great reset, as they call it. And let's take a look at a roundup at antiwar.com. The World Health Organization advised Ukraine to destroy pathogens. What those pathogens that don't exist? U.S. still rejects diplomacy with Putin over Ukraine. President Biden blames inflation on Putin's price hike. That is going over like a lead balloon, that one. Congress seeks larger military budget amid Ukraine invasion. House UK's banning Russian oil as Americans face soaring gas prices. Putin-Zelensky meeting proposed at talks. Russia will open evacuation corridors from 5 Ukrainian cities. Satellite imagery shows part of Russian military convoy has dispersed. U.S. sanctions Russian billionaire, banning him aiding Ukrainians. Group of House Democrats oppose Iran deal, threatening pact. Pentagon wants to send hundreds of troops to Somalia. How did that work the first time back in the 90s? I suppose the 90s, 1995? That was like a million years ago. There was a book, Black Hawk Down, that sold millions of copies. And before that, the author's stories had been syndicated around the United States. And there was a hit movie by Ridley Scott based on Black Hawk Down, and Tom Wolfe wrote a short story about it that was published in Rolling Stone magazine. But I guess we've all forgotten the American military intervention in Somalia because it was just so very long ago. And let's take a look at what the Daily Mail has for it. Right? West Point cadets are identified as the 6 Florida spring breakers who overdosed on fentanyl-laced cocaine. 2 who hadn't taken drugs poisoned when they gave their friends mouth to mouth. Yikes. I'm sick of this stuff. Biden tears into people, blaming him for inflation, and warns Democrats he will only have a veto pen if they lose to Republicans in the midterms. That's your campaign slogan? The veto pen? The weak. And the Russians with attitude Twitter feed is still up. Well, let's check. I have to check because it's going to be nuked eventually, and let's just see whether it has survived till now. Yes, it is. National Security Council report, a 20/1 report to the National Security Council by the Department of State on United States objectives with respect for Russia. Looks like the U.S. had a better understanding of geopolitical historical realities in 1948. The Ukrainian territory is as much a part of their national heritage as the Middle West is of ours, and they are conscious of that fact. A solution which attempts to separate the Ukraine entirely from the rest of Russia is bound to incur their resentment and opposition and can be maintained, in the last analysis, only by force. Changes between 2 days ago and today in the South Russia now possesses a complete road network between Crimea, South Front, Donbass, and Russia proper. There is still part of Line 84 that prevents freight rail use, but it's still a major development for this sector. I can't verify it, but a bunch of sources are saying that this is the Hotel Ukrainia in Chernigov, and that a lot of foreign fighters getting ready to join Ukraine's International Legion were staying there before it was hit with a precision strike. Theoretically, Chernigov is encircled, so either 1, the story isn't true, or 2, they were there before the encirclement, or 3, the encirclement isn't as complete as the maps show. Now, I mentioned yesterday that the ASB military Twitter feed was nuked. We can't have independent reporting on the Ukraine, but they have been translated to Gab. And what's the latest? Russian military Zala UAV captures destruction of the base of the self-proclaimed neo-Nazi Azov battalion in Mariupol. the National Guard of Ukraine, along with personal vehicles and military equipment. As you can see, contrary to what the mainstream media tells you, the Ukrainian armed forces are hiding among civilian infrastructure. You can observe secondary explosions which prove the presence of ammunition/weapons storage hidden in civilian neighborhoods, in addition to the countless photos and videos of Ukrainian fortifications in apartment buildings, schools, kindergartens, etc. We want to thank every single one of you that followed us from Gab to Twitter. We appreciate the loyalty and support, and we will not let you guys down. ASB lives on now on actual free platforms where we don't have to self-censor every post just to make sure we don't get banned. We also want to thank the Gab staff for verifying us and giving us all the tools we need from the get-go. All right. And let's check in on Jim Kunstler's column today, which is called Crashin' and Burnin'. Historians of the future, boiling acorns over their campfires, will wonder that amidst all the global strife of the 2020, Americans barely noticed that the U.S. government went to war on its own citizens. Was there something in the water, or more specifically in the Pepsi Cola? Or did those so-called vaccines, which were so popular as an emblem of their obedience to the science, turn their brains into something like an Oreo McFlurry? However it happened, said citizens marched themselves ardently into the VAERS database to receive gold stars on their vax passports, thinking jabs will make us free. Speaking of the science, the nation learned this week via a strangely staged colloquy between Senator Marco Rubio and Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland that, contra to official denials day before, our government was indeed running quite a few, I believe the actual number was 29, science projects in the foreign land called Ukraine, discovered in the course of Russian military operations there. Loose talk about bioweapons labs was efficiently quashed by Victoria Nuland, who styled the work as an inventory of, quote, biological research materials. These included such science-y playthings as Ebola, bubonic plague, anthrax, and sundry viral curiosities of nature. But it looked like she was trying to get ahead of the story, as they say in the agitprop industry. Speaking of Russia and agitprop, that's all we hear on the airwaves, the cable channels, and the web streams. Russia, 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 and Putin, Putin, Putin. American news reporters must be living in Vladimir Putin's head because they are so adept at reading his thoughts. Putin thinks this, Putin thinks that, they declare so brashly. They are also sure of Putin's every thought that Putin must have to check in with American news media to find out exactly what he's thinking. Lately, according to CNN, the New York Times, and the rest of the gang, Putin, or maybe it's the Putin, as in the science, is thinking of gobbling up all the other quaint little countries that Russia's bordered like so many tater tots. For your consideration, Kunstler writes, is it possible that Russian intel knew a little something about those Ukraine labs before February the 24th and became concerned that another concocted freak of nature pestilence might get loose there on the Eurasian frontier? And you must wonder, America saw Russian troops mustering around Ukraine's border for many weeks before their dastardly operations got underway. And yet nobody in those biolabs thought to maybe stuff their bioplaythings in the incinerator. Weird, a little bit. But notice of a piece with the sloppy-ass way that the U.S. has handled the entire COVID-19 fiasco, a Chinese fire drill inside a, I'm not going to repeat that word, garnished with the rankest dishonesty from start to finish. And to what purpose? After all, the cartoon character Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum crowed repeatedly about what a fine opportunity COVID-19 was to smash the operating system of Western Civ in order to build back better. A new system in which the zombified masses would have nothing and be happy, at least for the weeks and months they remained in the earthly plane of existence, before the vaccines they were induced to take infarcted their livers and lights, finally carrying them off to sprout wings and receive their issued harps and halos in cloud land. And then Herr Schwab and his tiny band of Übermenschen would be free to enjoy their transhuman nirvana, free of the swine-like multitudes previously cluttering up the planet. Yes, life in the early 21st century looks more and more like a bad horror movie, and now the critics are moving and savaging the projection. A massive murderous fraud, many are saying, of the COVID-19 extravaganza, and the audience, once back out in the blinding, clarifying daylight, are saying to themselves, yeah, kind of seems like it was. Fraud vitiates liability protection. It is a well-known principle among the artisans of law. Moderna stock is down 70% and Pfizer more than 20. Wall Street has sniffed out a motherload of rot, according to Edward Dowd, BlackRock investment advisor emeritus, who is saying it loudly over the alt streams, making a whole lot of public health officials and doctors nervous as roaches when the lights flash on. Mom impersonator Rochelle Walensky, chief of the CDC, has concealed much dire information about the number of so-called vaccine injuries and fatalities over the past year, while still importuning everybody to vax up and boost up, knowing that they might be harmed by it. Does she just skate on that? And then, of course, there is Dr. Fauci missing in action lately. Anybody look for him down in Paraguay? The clock is ticking on when the millions of lawsuits might commence, along with prosecutions for crimes against humanity. Cue Joe Biden, then, to crash the global economy and give folks other things to think about, like how am I going to keep driving 60 miles each way to work with gasoline at $8 a gallon? How indeed is anything like an advanced economy going to stagger forward now that nobody in the world will sell each other anything? Well, it probably just won't. All that's left is the sound of money being shot out of cannons, and nobody seems to notice that it gets shredded in the process. Jim Kunstler concludes, America has gazed into the abyss and apparently decided to sign a lease and move in. And I want to talk about a woman called Lori Penny. Let's go to the chat first. Joe-Can 666. Oh, yeah, we heard that already. The witch she played in that Disney movie was much nicer than Bet, says Dan. How about for them and Zer? Brandon yells at Cloud, says Dan. Yes, I want to talk about an English woman called Lori Penny. She was born Laura Barnett. How she got to be Lori Penny? I don't understand this. Does Laura Barnett sound a little too posh? Does it? She was born in 1986, described as British journalist and writer by Wiki. She's written articles for several major publications, including The Guardian, The New York Times, and Salon, is a contributing editor at The New Statesman, and is the author of several books on feminism. She has also written for American television shows, including The Haunting of Bly Manor and The Nevers. She attended the independent school Brighton College before studying English at Wadham College, Oxford. Her blog, Penny Red, was launched in 2007. Apparently, they keep listing her for the Orwell Prize. I can't imagine why, because she's a woman. Penny came out as genderqueer, pansexual, and polyamorous in 2015. In 2020, they stated a preference for the pronouns they, them. They also use she, her pronouns, but consider them less accurate. In December 2020, Penny married in Los Angeles. I'll get to that in a minute. And she is a survivor of CPD-ST. And you're wondering what that is. Apparently, it's a super special form of post-traumatic stress disorder. It's also known as complex trauma disorder. And it's a psychological disorder that can develop in response to exposure to an extremely traumatic series of events in a context in which the individual perceives little or no chance of escape, and particularly where the exposure is prolonged or creative. In Lori Penny, or Penny Dreadful, as I like to call her, in her case, bad reviews of her books. And now she suffers from a crippling medical condition, which doesn't stop her from writing Tosh and getting published, getting advances for her Tosh. For a person who is suffering from such a debilitating condition, she seems exceedingly active. But of course, they all are, aren't they? Now, this happened, 10 years ago, and it was much remarked about at the time, even in North America, that Lori Penny got into it with the British historian, David Starkey. Now, of course, we see a picture here of this rather large man pointing his finger a few inches away from Lori Penny's face. Lori Penny, by the way, she was in a throuple at one point. She's always messing about with her hair because this type of woman always is. Several times, pretty much shaving it all off, which is not a good look for any woman, particularly for a woman who looks like her. And of course, dyeing it wine colored. More details have emerged of the heavyweight clash of the commentariat this weekend between radical blogger and journalist Laurie Penny and the outspoken TV historian David Starkey at the Sunday Times Festival of Education. The newspaper released video clips today of the contretemps, and these YouTube videos went viral, which occurred after the historian had talked about the values of the Asian men from Rochdale who were convicted of grooming young white girls for sex as being, quote, entrenched in the foothills of the Punjab or wherever it is, unquote, and how the men needed to be, quote, inculcated in the British ways of doing things, unquote. Penny accused Starkey of playing xenophobia and national prejudice for laughs and asked him in a leading question whether he had a home in America, implying that Starkey might have tax questions to answer, a strong innuendo in the current climate of zero tolerance. The video shows Starkey bouncing out of his seat in response to this perceived smear. Well, it was a smear, full stop. Taking to the lectern to share a little story about how he and Penny had both been invited to debate by the Thomas Paine Society, but that while he had agreed to waive his fee, the younger polemicist had asked for such a large fee that the event had to be canceled. Quote, I think that is as mean as grasping as some runt comedian, and I will not be lectured to by a public school girl like you. A visibly angry Starkey spits. Now, I've seen the video, and what he said was even better. What he said was, I will not be lectured to by a jumped up public school girl like you. I came from the bottom and I will not have it. He signs off with a flourish to considerable applause from a crowd quite evidently relishing the ruckus. Penny attempts to repudiate the points but stumbles over her answer, while Starkey sups from a glass of red wine behind her and the panel discussion continues. However, Penny gets another chance to explain herself and uses to claim that the actions of Starkey were one of the reasons why she had quoted a ridiculous sum of money so as not to be subjected to the, quote, violence inherent in this discussion, unquote. Well, you know, a debate can be considered to be a form of violence, a verbal violence. If you're so afraid of verbal violence, why would you take part in a debate? Well, we know why, so that Penny Dreadful can cast herself once again as a pitiful victim. A voice from the crowd shouts at her, you started it, you called him a racist, to which Penny replies, he is a racist. At this point, the chaplain of Wellington College jumps onto the stage to call a halt to the proceedings. Events then take a turn as James Brown, Starkey's partner, leaps up on stage, appears to remove something from Starkey's jacket, and then begins to harangue Penny. He is joined by Claire Fox, director of the Institute of Ideas think tank, who, according to the Sunday Times, had already attacked Penny from the floor for being a disgrace to feminism. Penny uses her independent column today to tell her side of the story, referring to Starkey as a dinosaur and mocking him as bigotarus ridiculous. That's fancy writing. With a touch of esprit d'escalier, Penny concludes, like the ancient lizards, Starkey and his kind are perilously ill-adapted to the modern world, but they have to be consigned to history where they belong. So, Penny Dreadful has a new book out, and it has been savaged by reviewers. And Julie Burchill, I can't say that I'm a fan of Julie Burchill. I've known her writing, since 1976, actually. But she is admirably combative. I will give her that. And don't dish it out if you can't take it. Yes, indeed. This is the message that has to be impressed upon every woman who has pretensions to being a polemicist, controversialist, pundit, or whatever. Don't dish it out if you can't take it. Laurie Penny has not reacted well to the skewering of their latest tome. It was Iris Murdoch who said a bad book review is even less important than whether it is raining in Patagonia. And as someone who has had loads, I'd be inclined to agree. I don't recall a bad review ever even putting me off my feed for a few hours, let alone causing me to have the abdabs. I first became aware of Lori Penny, who identifies as non-binary, who in 2011, they called me a clod-headed, a rent-a-gob, and bonkers for admiring Israel. This is Burchell admiring Israel, not Penny. At the time, I no doubt chuckled and bounced out to a watering hole, as is my wont. But in the light of recent trends, I'm reviewing the situation, especially the bonkers bit. Were they neurodiverse shaming me? And didn't they know that their words were literally violence? A decade has passed, and Penny has since moved to Los Angeles to a plum job writing for HBO and Netflix. Who could possibly have any beef, hope that's not cow shaming, with our humble heroine? Well, quite a lot of people, as the recent publication and subsequent mastication of her latest book, Sexual Revolution, showed. The reviews were gloriously brutal, almost making up for the crimes against our mother tongue, chest-feeding, birthing parent tongue, that Penny inevitably commits with each ponderous new tome. Even that notoriously right-wing rag, The Guardian, said of Sexual Revolution, "This isn't feminism, this is a swizz." Penny was unusually quiet for a few weeks, but one sensed a brooding presence in the sulking corner of social media. Then at the weekend, there was a sumptuous smorgasbord of self-pity from them on Twitter. I did my best stiff upper lip for a few days, buried myself in work, as I always do. After 12 years of relentless trolling, I was having rolling panic attacks, was bone-tired, confused, and constantly cold. Thought I had COVID. Nope. Just complex PTSD. I still don't know how I managed not to miss a single day in the writer's room I can't talk about because NDAs. In hindsight, I'm slightly impressed with myself. That is really not that far from Alan Partridge. And the reason for this fainting fit? Those book reviews, of course. Last month, the book I poured my heart and brain into came out. Some transphobes and angry faux liberals in the British press went on the attack in a coordinated, vicious way. Apparently, it's considered unprofessional to respond to reviews, but in this case, those involved in the hit job are the ones who behaved unprofessionally. They knew exactly what they were doing, and frankly, they ought to be ashamed of themselves. They weren't, though, Julie Burchell continues, especially the veteran feminist activist Julie Bindel, who reviewed Penny's book for The Critic. A splendidness commenced as Bindel tweeted, "I am on a train and I've just diagnosed myself with complex PTSD because a fella has just opened a packet of cheesy Wotsits. I should be cured by the time I reach Darlington unless some homophobe reviews this tweet and says it's crap, in which case I will be sectioned by York." It's always thrilling when the Queen shows up. None other than J.K. Rowling herself responded with, "Thoughts and prayers, Julie." When Penny pouted, "I'm the person whose mental health history is being mocked in this tweet. I hope you don't think it's okay to shame people like this," Rowling delivered the knockout verbal punch trigger warning. "Lori, you've been flinging terms like fascist and transphobe against women who disagree with you for a very long time. I don't recall you showing the slightest empathy for other women's trauma while you dismissed their, in my view, reasonable and rational concerns. You claim to be suffering PTSD because of bad book reviews. If they cause you equivalent trauma to being bombed out of your house or witnessing the murder of loved ones, maybe find a job where dishing it out but not being able to take it is a key requirement," unquote. Burchell continues, "Having dished it out loads during my long, louche career, I've made a point of never bleating when I have to take it. When both my book contract and newspaper column were canceled a few years back, I pranced merrily on. But then, as someone who has made it against all odds, it's fair to say that only a handful of women from working class backgrounds ever make a living as writers in any generation. My sense of myself does not depend on the validation of others." This episode is not just a couple of media types squabbling, it's class war by another root. As Brendan O'Neill wrote on Spiked last month in his review of Penny's book, is anyone else sick and tired of public life being dominated by the neuroses of the upper middle class? The petty concerns of the self-pitying rich have colonized politics, culture, and the media. When you consider yourself left-wing, but the Marxists over at Counterfire say of your book, The non-existence of class in Penny's worldview renders the central argument about work particularly incoherent. You might just want to check your compass, but they won't. Their politics are strikingly personal, bourgeois, individualist even. When a monument to women who fought in the Second World War was vandalized in 2015, they said it was fine. Their grandma fought in the war, and they honored her memory by staying angry. So that's okay then. Sod the rest of you and your grandmas. Penny also squeals about Western sexism while giving Islamism a hall pass. They once wore a hijab and gushed about how great it felt, while their opinion on the 2015 Paris massacre was racist trolling is not heroism. Je ne suis pas Charlie. You would think that the war in Ukraine might have given such alleged empaths a moment's pause in their navel gazing and belly aching, but it's business as usual. I've been suspended from Twitter, Burchell reveals, after saying that unarmed Ukrainians facing down Russian tanks are braver than men who dress up as women. However, I will scatter my pearls before the whiny non-binary and warn them that the reviews can get only worse. Last year, Penny caused revulsion among actual feminists when commenting on an incident in a California spa when a woman complained that her young daughter shouldn't have to share the female-only section of the spa with naked men who identified as women. Penny said that the child should not stare at other people's genitals without their permission because it's rude. So that's my advice to them on how to deal with negative critical reaction to their ever deteriorating work. If you don't like it, don't look. As mentioned previously, Penny Dreadful got married. And we're all shocked or something like that because she was non-binary and polyamorous and the like. She, back in December 2020, she had a piece at Wired which runs to thousands of words, and my word, she is a dreadful writer. My highly unexpected heterosexual pandemic Zoom wedding. Yes, of course, Zoom. Love caught me by surprise, but we were continents apart. And here you see Penny Dreadful slipping into the style immortalized by Private Eye magazine as that of Sylvie Crin. We were in the middle of promising to grow old together when the sound cut out. The officiant's face pixelated and froze, and we couldn't hear what she was mouthing. Until the Wi-Fi started working, we wouldn't know whether or not we were married. It was 8 a.m. We were standing alone in a tiny front porch of an Airbnb in a country where we were both foreigners, with some string lights hastily flung over the metal grating. My mom, his mom, and two witnesses were just visible on screen, shouting soundlessly, all of us wondering if this was the internet raising a last-minute objection. It was cold. I cuddled into my giant rainbow stripy jumper, the comfort garment that got me through 9 months of quarantine. Pretty stinky, I would guess. I was glad I'd thrown it on in lieu of a wedding dress. He reached for my hand. Nothing was going to plan, but then nothing has gone to plan all year, and certainly not since I met the madman in the bow tie standing in front of me. My sister, who has spent lockdown in London organizing professional events and knows what to do when these things happen, texted me to translate what the officiant was mouthing. You've got to log in back into the platform. After some tense minutes of telling our guests on Zoom to hang on, sorry, everyone, talk amongst yourselves while we get this sorted, we finally got the sound back, sort of, although the officiant now sounded like an excited fax machine. The line buzzed. Time seemed to go very, very slowly. As I was saying, she intoned, by the power vested in me by the state of Utah, I now pronounce you husband and wife. All right, let me explain. In love, as in war, technology allows people to do what they would have done anyway, faster and with fewer immediate consequences. Before there was Match.com, there were matchmakers and Miss Lonely Hearts. Before there was Grindr, there were glory holes. Ugh. The polyamorous millennials sharing their Google calendars with a constellation of partners are the inheritors of every fastidious hippie who ever took 5 hours to explain free love with flowcharts. But there is no exact pre-digital equivalent of the 4 a.m. status update. It combines the desperate passion of toilet graffiti with the intimacy of a barstool confessional. My word, this woman is a terrible writer. It was June, and the world was on fire, and I was drunk. I spent the first part of lockdown engaging in a demeaning Zoom dating as an alternative to more debilitating methods of self harm. This culminated with a chap I've been going on virtual dates with for a month, announcing that he had, in fact, been interviewing several candidates for the position of girlfriend, and regrettably, I had not made the cut. I'm just going to cry a little here. A few days later, lightly chemically altered, I made a post letting everyone on Facebook know I was bored of being single, out of practice at flirting, and if anyone had any attractive single friends, they should let me know. In the morning, fumbling to delete the post, I saw that I was already too late. People had started to chime in, including a shy anthropologist from Australia with nice hair who I'd met a total of once 3 years ago. He was far too away himself, he said, but might know someone in my city. I pointed out that in quarantine times, everyone not living next door might as well be on the moon. Well, he said, in that case, might I like to practice flirting with him? At this point, I got that tremulous feeling in my belly where you're not sure whether something brilliant is happening or you've just swallowed a wasp. We'd only seen each other the other one time briefly at a book festival in Melbourne. We met by chance and shared an obscenely early cup of coffee. What does an obscenely early cup of coffee mean? People drink coffee at any hour of the day. One of those situations where you're not sure if it's a date and are too shy to ask. We discussed Doctor Who, of course, and anarchist theory, of course. I admired his band t-shirt, of course. And both of us came away with the impression that the other one wanted to keep things platonic, which was fine, absolutely fine, and not at all disappointing. And neither of us were at all wistful when we saw the other's status updates go by over the intervening years. Finding out that we had always fancied each other was an unexpected treat. Something was different enough at least to move right from Messenger to WhatsApp for no rational reason whatsoever. Has always felt like the most intimate platform for me. The Signal is more secure, of course, but it's where all my ex-partners hang out. We talked about how we were both suspicious of the heterosexual couple form, which is one of my favorite ways to flirt. You ever heard of a postmatism? It comes from biology. It's a coloration of behavior in animals and insects. Basically, it's a beware. Don't come close to me or I will hurt you. Everything, every single thing about Lori Penny is a postmatism. And yet apparently some men are so desperate that they're going to get involved with Penny Dreadful anyway. It's not that I'm unromantic. The opposite. I've never been able to maintain the requisite level of laid backery when I really like someone and switch straight to the sonnet writing. Oh, stop. This rarely produces the desired effect, particularly in straight men. Does it produce the desired effect in homosexual men? If normal heterosexuality means hammering your heart into manageable contours, I don't want it. This year, though, the colliding catastrophes of pandemic, climate collapse, civil unrest, and economic calamity have made the entire question of normality somewhat moot. When I finally saw his face on Zoom, we started out by watching a lot of the old classic episodes of Doctor Who together and talking about protest theory. We found out we had the same karaoke song and talked about one day being able to go somewhere to actually empirically prove who's better at it. Why is that word empirically in that sentence? You might want to indicate that perhaps you're making a joke. Empirically prove who's better at a karaoke song. There was also an 8-hour time difference, which we negotiated by calling to wake another up. Without noticing, it became every day and every night for weeks. The distance helped. As I put it to him early on, and this is an exact quote, I may be a wild and untamable, trauma-twitchy, anarcho-feminist, fundamentally, personally, and politically opposed to het partnership as a social organizing principle, but I'm also not an effing tool. Yeah, I can see why this guy's single. Oh, and I'll just leave you with so this is just so irresistible. I can't help myself. The most deviant commodity on the modern internet isn't sex, it's sincerity. By definition, it can't be manufactured and it's difficult to replicate and resell, both of which make earnest enthusiasm suspect. Sincerity is not the same as enthusiasm, Laurie Penny. But you can't have romance without it, and people are craving romance right now, panting like parched spaniels for the sweet stuff. Oh, just stop! It's beautiful and it's stupid, and we need it. Online, it's easier to tell people how you really feel. That's just not true for the troll armies spewing their untrammeled spite across social media. It's also true for people trying to strengthen communities, build relationships, try to find new ways of showing up for one another over months of social distancing and civil collapse. Uh-oh. Bikini? She's going to put on a bikini and go to the beach? To give you a sense of context, this is like Mr. Rogers announcing that he'd quite like to put on a policeman's helmet and go to the sex dungeon. The sex dungeon? But there's only one? There's no law against it. It just doesn't seem very on brand. You see, that's the thing about Laurie Penny. She is just so very unpredictable. This literally thousands of words long. And of course, she gets an obligatory reference to, various forms of deviant sex. Yeah, okay, that's it. Oh, he loves ska music because of course he does. Of course he does. And he's something of an expert on it as well. How long do you think that this marriage is going to last? But it's just delightful to see Laurie Penny get a literal whacking. People finally having enough of her. Oh, did you know that Laurie? She's such a feminist. Of course, she's in favor of prostitution. Of course, she is. And yeah, let's not make a fuss about grooming because that would be racist and xenophobic and the like. Yeah, feminism means saying that you're a feminist. I can't really find any other definition that is efficacious. I just Googled a pic of Laurie Penny. It says Palpicasso88. Gross. And color hair are warnings. Yes, eyeglasses and color hair are warning signs. Yes, yes, indeed. Especially the wine-colored hair. Gamian says, like KMG said, aposematism. Hey, I like ska, says Chogokin666. I just got back and I hear the name Laurie Penny, says David the Gnome. Before you even think about love, you should first read Stendhal, says Dionysus. My trail of disgrace is not liking my reading. Oh, it's an emoji, a vomit emoji. Hello to Eloise Campbell. I find actual penny dreadfuls from the Victorian era more interesting, says Media Hits. Why did they take hysteria out of the medical books? Because it was too useful. Gamia says, Penny is such an interesting person, so unique and rebellious. I'd love to meet her and her body and learn in a safe space that needs to be decolonized. Dionysa says, have you ever read The Master and Margarita? That's by Bulgakov. A Ukrainian communist Jew recommended to me when we took acid together. That's a real Dionysus story. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up for today and this week. I'll get back to the normal schedule of Music Monday and of Theater Thursday in the book club next week, and I'll have the pinned tweets at the top of my Twitter feed with what is upcoming. So I can't guarantee that I will be back on Monday, but I will try my hardest to be back on Monday. Thank you all for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it, as always. If you'd like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Why is this so bright? A little late in the day to care, but yes, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, Donations to the live stream may be made directly via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this benediction: in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.